So, Berto, did you watch the Netflix series, TV show, miniseries thing called Russian Doll? Did you watch it?
I did.
What'd you think about it? Did you like it? Give me 10 out of 10 stars.
I'd give it a 7. I did enjoy it a lot.
And was it interesting? Is it worth doing a whole episode about?
Absolutely. There's lots to talk about. And the general theme of reliving days is very personal to me. And also one of my favorite movies is about that. And so I'd love to talk about it.
Personal with you. Can you give us a introduction to that one?
Well, for 10 years, I lived the same day over. No, not just kidding. No, I've talked about this a little bit before, but I had many years, I think all my 20s and part of my 30s, where I would constantly dream that I could go back to a specific date and time and relive my life again to that point.
Why?
For a combination of reasons. I had felt that I had made wrong choices. I had felt that I had misspent my time. I was like, oh, if I could go back, I would do this different. I would do this different. I would do this different.
When would you fantasize about that?
Especially at night. There were times where I would spend hours thinking about it before I fell asleep.
Wow. So this show, Russian Doll, really gave you that chance to do it, but in a way that might tell you that it's not such a great thing.
In a different way.
So let's talk about Russian Doll, Berto. This is the Psychology in Seattle podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Kirk Honda. I'm a therapist and a professor. Who are you, Berto?
My name is Humberto Castañeda, and I actually make little, what was the Star Trek things that multiplied all over the place? Tribbles?
Tribbles.
Yeah, I make cribbles, which are like tribbles, but I couldn't get the branding, so.
So Russian Doll, created by, do you know who it was created by?
Amy Poehler?
Yep.
Yeah.
And Natasha Lyonne.
Yeah, like co-created. Yeah, co-created.
And Leslie Headland.
So I don't know who's Leslie Headland.
Another producer, another creator. So Natasha Lyonne, what do you remember her from?
So it's funny you say that. So when I first watched the show, I thought, oh, I think she's in 10 Things I Hate About You. I love her. But the reason I thought she was in 10 Things I Hate About You is because she was in the slums of Beverly Hills, which I love. And the actor in that was in 10 Things I Hate About You. So that's the main thing I remembered her from.
Yeah, I remember her from a movie I remember her from Slums of Beverly Hills, but I really remember her from But I'm a Cheerleader, which was in 1999, the year after Slums of Beverly Hills.
Yeah, I never saw that one.
Yeah, so in 1999, conversion therapy was still in full force.
Yeah.
And religious oppression to gay people and society oppression. I mean, the percentage of Americans back then, if I remember right, was like, I don't know, a quarter of Americans were in support of gay marriage. That number quickly increased until 5 years ago-ish when we crested the 50 percentile point. But we're talking 1999. It was still don't ask, don't tell,
right.
Blah, blah, blah. And this is a movie in which this lesbian teenager is sent to a conversion therapy school or camp or whatever, and the entire movie takes place at this conversion therapy.
Oh my God.
Camp.
I gotta watch that.
And Natasha Lyonne is the main character, and it's a comedy but moving. And I remember when I watched it in my 20s thinking it really opened my eyes to this whole thing, and I just remember it really impacting me at the time. She's also in Orange is the New Black. Do you watch that show?
No, I watched like the first episode, so I didn't really watch it.
Yeah, I've watched it off and on and found it to be interesting. I guess it's probably the sort of show you need to watch from the beginning because there's so many different soap opera-y storylines, you know. But and I think
was she a main character?
Yeah, she was one of the main ones. I think well, anyway, I won't talk out of my ass. I'll just shut up. Which one of my friends do you think she reminded me of while watching Russian Doll?
Let's see.
And you can name her. Well, and if it's the right one, you can name her, but think about before naming. Because she reminds me of what?
Nicole?
No. When I say, you'll be like, oh my God, Sarah from Vancouver.
Oh, okay, sure.
I mean, can you see it?
Yeah, I could see that.
Exactly. I mean, same hair. Same attitude.
Yeah, okay. Is she from the East Coast?
same voice, same nihilism and stuff.
Sure.
Anyway, I actually texted her to see if anyone has been saying that, because I imagine a lot of people are saying, "Oh my God, you're in a new show called Russian Doll." So one of the notable things about this production is that it's mainly all women who put it on.
Right. Yeah. I think they were very purposeful in that. Like they hired writers, there were women directors and camera people. Everything.
Well, that's a good question. I don't know if they were purposeful about like, well, we're only looking at women. I mean, it could have been that they just.
Well, I saw an interview with them where they were talking about how one of the things was that they wanted to explore a lot of the options that women don't get. And so, you know, it's sort of like the feeling was that if it's driven by women, maybe it'll really have a different voice.
Yeah. So all women writers, all women directors, all women showrunners, and they also casted men in a way that usually women are casted. Did you get a sense for that?
Oh, totally.
How so?
Except for the co-star, the other dude.
Well,
but by the way, spoiler alert. If you haven't seen it, spoiler alert.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Alan is the other guy. I would say that his character was more in line with the way you would have written a female character.
Could be, yeah. Because but certainly the other ones for sure, yeah.
Yeah. But, you know, because you can imagine, well, for example, with Groundhog Day with Bill Murray, well, you got to have a love interest.
Yeah.
So with this show, if say the Russian Doll was originally about a guy,
right,
well, you got to have a woman in there. You got to throw in some sexual tension. And so Alan is that character.
Right.
You know what I mean? So yeah, I definitely got a sense for that as I was watching it.
And I wonder if that...
And it really bothered me. No, just joking.
Well, I wonder if that speaks a little bit to that some of those stereotypes, that maybe the problem wasn't so much that they were stereotypes about how women are or aren't, but really that so much of movies and shows were about guys.
I wouldn't characterize it as stereotypes. What I would characterize it as tone.
Sure.
So in typical movies, particularly as we go further back in history, the main character was almost always a white guy at the center. And then other roles were, if you're going to give a role to a woman, it was usually one-dimensional at best.
Yeah.
And they would be secondary plot devices that weren't fully developed characters, that didn't have a wide range of experiences or emotions or things to say. But the main character, the white guy, would have lots of different things to say, lots of different, you know, ups and downs and whatnot.
But then my argument, my controversial argument is that that's maybe just the nature of who's the protagonist of a story, because you have to spend the most time with them.
Sure, and there were very few movies that had the protagonist as the woman.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So
because you could argue in this show, the male, other than the second dude, the other co-star, the male, her ex-lover, the guy she meets up at the party and stuff like that, they're quite one-dimensional.
Right.
Yeah.
That's quintessential. There's so many movies where it's reversed, right?
Yeah, and I'm on the spot. I hadn't thought about this before. I'm saying maybe that's just the nature of, like, when you make a show or write a story, you have to pick one or a couple characters to really focus on, and everyone else becomes more one-dimensional. But when most 99% of stories were about white men, it starts feeling like the other people of races and sexes are really all one-dimensional.
Right. Another cliche that everyone knows is, if you're a black guy in a horror movie, you die first.
Right.
Because you're one-dimensional. You're a secondary element of.
If you're an Asian guy in an action movie, you're the karate guy.
And you're a terrible, terrible driver.
Right.
So this is great, you know, that you have an all-woman production, writer, director, showrunner team. But, you know, this shouldn't be newsworthy. Let's think about just some of the few movies that I thought up off the top of my head that are all male producers, directors, creators, and writers. Can you think of any? Just some of them were nominated for the Oscars
this year.
Yeah.
Roma. I don't know.
No, Roma had a female producer, I believe.
Okay.
So Black Panther.
Okay.
All men. Black Klansman, all men. Bohemian Rhapsody, all men. Green Book, all men. Isle of Dogs, all men. Aquaman, all. And these are just the big movies. Mission Impossible, all men. Avengers: Infinity War, all men. So you know, and we're not talking like a mixture. We're talking all men. So the fact that it's newsworthy that we have one small little Netflix production that has all women is bizarre, really.
I mean, it's going to take decades and decades for anything other than that to be the reality, right?
And, well, who knows how long it'll take exactly, but the efforts that we can put into it, such as I'm guessing Amy Poehler had a large part to do with that, because I know that she has tried to make a point of that, to speak to women's rights and issues and advocacy.
Right.
I just want to go on a tiny little Avengers Infinity War tangent here for a second.
Okay.
Do you know how much this movie cost?
$200 million.
Double that, $400 million.
Oh my God.
Almost $500 million. Do you know how much how much it made?
$2 billion.
Yeah, $2 billion. That's more money than the yearly GDP of several countries.
Yeah.
Like Belize. So in Belize, you add up every human being, every industry,
right,
every export, everything that you make, everything that you do in one country for an entire year.
Right.
Every restaurant, every factory, every power company, you add up everything that they did in US dollars for the entire country for an entire year,
right,
and it doesn't amount to the amount of money that Avengers Infinity War made. And that's just one movie that lasts for 2 hours. That's, yeah, it just really, it's depressing because there are so many things we need to be doing for the world. I don't know about Belize, but like poverty, malaria around the world. And if we all just said, you know what, let's all collectively decide that we're not going to go to an Avengers movie this year. And instead we're all, however many millions of people, we're all going to spend $15 and send it to help millions of people get fed and not have malaria in a part of the world that has that. And we could save an entire society. That's what's depressing to me.
Right. This is why, as much as I don't like the idea of it, because it seems so unfair, this is why some on the left push for super high tax rates at the higher end of the scales, because they see that that's maybe the only way to distribute wealth back into the masses. Well,
if it actually does that, it'd be great.
Well, right. The idea is to tax high and then pair it with social programs that do that. But of course, if you don't, then you're just doing wars, then that doesn't help.
Yeah, and bailing out the banks.
Right.
I mean, that's what a lot of our government did. Okay, another element about this show, Russian Doll, aside from it being all women creators, was there was a ton of people of color and a ton of queer people in this movie. Did you notice that?
Yeah, absolutely.
How did you notice that?
Well, I mean, her main friends were... one of her main friends was clearly in a lesbian relationship or even multiple relationships.
She seemed bi.
Maybe bi.
Yeah.
But then it seemed like the whole party she was at for her birthday was filled with a wide range of diverse sounding and looking people.
Right. The thing that I loved about this was that it had a ton of diversity and it just made them normal people, like Alex, the Asian girl who she always bumped into as she came out of the bathroom. There was nothing Asian about her that I remember.
Yeah.
She was just a woman at the party.
Yep.
And as an Asian person, every time I see that, I just celebrate in my pants.
Right.
I don't know why I said that. Is that a saying?
It's a saying, but I don't know if you mean to say it that way. Celebrate in my pants. I mean, maybe you mean it that way.
I think what I meant to say was like I'm jumping up and down or something.
Yeah, okay. That's a different way.
Yeah.
Different approach.
Yeah. I mean,
I just celebrated a little bit in my pants.
So maybe at the end of every episode, we should just be like, I'm celebrating in my pants, because you go ahead and celebrate in your pants because you deserve it. There's so many depictions of Asians as foreigners, even sympathetic depictions of Asians that are foreigners, that it just drives me crazy, because it's like all the Asians I know, because I live in the United States, are not foreign. I mean, there's very few Asians I know who are actual foreign born.
Right.
And
her race played nothing into her character or her role.
There was no accent. Yeah. There, you know. So all over this movie. So yeah, we had Max, played by Greta Lee. She's Korean American. John, the ex-boyfriend, was played by Yul Vasquez, who's Cuban American. You had Alan, who seems like a person of color. He was. I looked him up. He was adopted, and so I don't into a white family. I don't know, but he seemed. Yeah. You know, Rebecca Henderson, Lizzie. This is the friend that you referred to. She was bi, I'm guessing, because there was that scene where she wakes up,
right, in like an orgy kind of thing.
And man, I was rolling on the ground watching that guy walk around with that dildo coming out.
A dildo coming out of his, like, tied to his butt.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So now that I'm talking about my wife sometimes, I can say this, and she'll hate me for saying this, but she might be able to overhear this, is that she asked me, she said, "Is that a thing?"
I haven't seen those in like 10 years.
I mean, there's just so many things interesting about her asking me that question. One, she thinks of me as like someone who would know. And two, that she would think it was. Anyway, God, it feels so good to make fun of her on the podcast now.
Cathartic.
Ritesh Rajan worked at the deli. He's an Indian American. No accent. Just a regular guy. Right. Just total straight.
Buddies with the other dude.
Total straightforward guy. Yeah. Nothing
weird about it.
Stereotypical about him. He's just a regular guy who works at a store who happens to be Indian American.
Yeah.
The girlfriend of Alan is a Beatrice, played by a Dominican American. The drug dealer is played by a guy from India, and many others. So let's get into the themes, Berto.
Yeah.
What are the psychological themes of Russian Doll?
Yeah, wow. So there's certainly, even at the onset of the show, the very first sequence, there is this thing with self-awareness and discovery of oneself, because the very first scene is her looking at herself in the mirror. So this is like, and this becomes a theme because mirrors start disappearing later. So there is the kind of the, who am I? Why am I here? Kind of question. And that's presented as the first question. But then there's also this idea of things that haunt us from our past that are getting in the way of our ability to make progress or get past. So like the whole repeating a day is a metaphor for real life getting stuck in downward spirals that we can't really get out of. And we keep making the same mistakes over and over and over. And that a lot of that might have to be, or all of it might have to do with trauma from our younger lives, from our younger selves. That's a couple of them for sure. And I know that there's others.
Did that make you think about your own life at all?
Certainly, yeah. Part of the reason I said that this theme is very personal to me is that that feeling of, first of all, the feeling of looking in a mirror, like, who am I? A couple things came to mind. One was one time that I was extremely intoxicated in college, and I woke up looking at myself in a mirror. And
what do you mean woke up, or like you blacked out? Or?
I blacked out, and
But you were walking around?
I was standing in a bathroom.
And you suddenly came to?
Yeah, hours later. Yeah, wow. Like an hour later, 2 hours later, something like that.
Well, wait, so you must have been walking around doing things.
No, I was in a bathroom throwing up all over the place.
Oh, you were like passed out?
Throwing up all over the bathroom.
And maybe passed out?
Blacked out.
But walking around?
Walking around.
Okay. And then all of a sudden
all of a sudden, my eyes open, and I'm holding myself up at the sink looking at myself in the mirror, and I'm like, what is going on? Who am I? Like, it was a very surreal moment, because it was almost like coming back from a different time and place and being like, what is happening?
Whoa.
You know, and that was really, it was scary and confusing, and this was in college. And so that's one thing. And the second part of it is that, as I mentioned earlier in this episode, I spent years thinking, oh man, and wishing so hard, if I could just go back to that first day of high school, or if I could just go back to this day in my past, all the things I could do differently, all the different decisions, all the ways that I wouldn't waste my hours on a day-to-day basis. And it was such a strong feeling. So that feeling of like, what can I make different decisions? Do we get to go back in time and change the past? What happens if we do change the past? What are the risks with changing the decisions we've already made? All that came up for me while I was watching this show.
Yeah, interesting. I was wondering what you would say to this, and this is a whole side of you I didn't know. I'm glad to have known that. It's interesting. So the main theme to me that I pulled away from this, particularly as the story wrapped up at the end, was empathy, as the only way out of the loop was to have compassion, to step outside of yourself and have generativity and benevolence for other people.
Right, because in her case, it's taking an interest in helping this guy out instead of just like joking around with the other guys. And in his case, it's like actually going and confronting his fiance or his about to be fiance, and instead of just being about his feelings and his anger towards what he's discovered, which is that she was cheating on him, instead being empathetic to her needs and her situation.
Right. I just thought that was so masterfully done because it wasn't cheesy. Like, as if you haven't seen it and we describe it that way, it sounds super cheesy. It's like, oh, that's because in Groundhog Day, that's essentially the same plot. He is stuck in a loop and he tries all these different things. And the only thing that works to get him out of the loop was to be truly genuine and nice.
Yeah, empathy for real.
And then, not acting empathetic, but actual selfless giving of yourself.
Right, because by the way, you mentioned one of my favorite movies of all time, and that was the one I was referring to. And in that movie, we see the scenes where he's trying to game the system. And he's like, okay, well, she likes this. Okay, I'll say I want, oh, you like red wine. Okay, and he gets only so far with that technique and it still fails. And it was basically after he's given up hope and he turns away from his ego that he rebuilds slowly with actually like looking around and being like, oh, okay, there's other people here that I should care about.
Right.
Yeah.
So a similar thing done in a lighter, more straightforward, more obvious way. For Russian Doll, it's done in what I would consider to be a more realistic way, like every step of the way. And by the time you get to that climax of them making those changes, particularly when Alan made the change, it felt so earned. It felt so real.
Yeah, this is the part that the reason I only gave it a 7 is because I actually felt that his side of the story was a lot more cohesive in that sense. Whereas I felt like I didn't really get a sense that she wasn't that empathetic. She starts helping people almost right away. And I actually felt that the choice to help him over the others was actually very trivial. And so her side of the story seemed a lot more about her making peace about her mother. And that part, which is what I was saying about like dealing with the demons from our past, there was this very metaphorical moment when she, like the glass comes out from her mouth from the mirrors that her mom had destroyed on that fateful day or whatever. And that's finally her sort of like letting go of her mother and being able to move forward. And I liked that, but I felt that was almost like, I didn't like how the two pieces fit together. Like I felt like the other story was a lot clearer for me.
So here's my hypothesis. So there's 2 more seasons.
I heard that.
And I think that this is not Lost, like the TV show Lost.
Yeah.
Where they were just making it up as they were going along for season 1 and had no idea where this is going. I think that the writers wrote this out very clearly for 3 seasons, and they wanted to make the first season a cohesive whole, but they also are absolutely setting up future seasons, but it's not obvious how they are. And I think as we go, because I don't think they wanted to wrap her up completely.
And that could make sense. Like maybe the next season starts with her thinking, okay, glad that's over. Wait, why am I caught in another loop?
Right.
Oh, I wasn't done with my own journey or something like that. Sure.
I think that along these lines, did you notice at the end there are 3 Nadias walking through the tunnel?
I didn't notice it when I saw it, but when I was watching some of the YouTube stuff, they talked about that. Yeah.
Right. So there are 3 Nadias and there are 3 seasons, so it makes sense that there's going to be more learning that she has to go through. And so I think that's part of it too, because there's a lot of unanswered questions, like what was the mom really suffering from?
Right.
And why was Max, the Korean American woman, sort of in the know at the end when she's the last one left at the party? And she seems, Nadia's like, you got to come with me. And Max is like, I can't.
Yeah.
And there's no real explanation.
And to me, because there were some aspects of the show, the whole show, of course, is magical in a way, right? But meaning that they're certainly in a magical situation. But there were some moments that went further down the surreal path. That was one of them. I kind of got an illusion with a lot of those moments to the video game angle, right? Because like these are NPCs in the video game that she's experiencing. Which, by the way, that was another angle that I thought they were going to lean heavier into, which was, she was a video game developer. And then they tried to do this thing about how she had created this game that was really impossible to beat.
And you'd fall down a hole, and she kept falling down the stairs.
Right. And so hopefully they go further with that in the next season.
Well, depending.
Maybe.
I'm really curious what they decide to do because given how this season went, I could see it going lots of different ways.
Yeah.
As soon as it was over, I didn't realize there were 2 other seasons. So I thought, okay, it's done. Either. And then I saw, there are 2 other seasons. I was like, oh no.
Right.
They're going to ruin it. It's one of those things because this is a good show. And
it was nicely capped in that sense, yeah.
But so I could see it going badly for sure. But given the smart people behind this, I suspect that it'll be not only cohesive, but will be like epically good once you see all 3 seasons.
I would have that trust too, especially because one way they could take this is that she sort of becomes a little bit of an expert at this kind of thing. And so, maybe she actually embraces her role as the time fixer or something,
Well, the other thing that I think will happen is that other characters, like Alan, I think is done. And I think that other characters will come in. Like, I think Oatmeal has something to do with
she
that. She
still never found her cat, not in the main timeline.
I think that Horse, the homeless guy, has something to do.
Yeah, and there's more sort of like, there is definitely this other dark underworld that they implied is there for these people living in a homeless life.
Right.
Yeah.
Max, the Asian woman who was at the party, I think she has something to do with it. Also, the neighbor in Alan's building is played by the guy from Rocky, and he had like 2 lines.
Yeah.
So there's no way they cast that guy for only a couple lines. So I'm guessing in future seasons, he will have full episodes just for himself, or he'll team up with Nadia or something.
Maybe. I mean, I thought the same thing initially, because remember that first scene where the dude, Alan, is walking in and he says something to him.
To Rocky guy.
What's his name?
I have his name.
Come on.
His name.
Paulie.
Yeah, Paulie.
I
don't have his name. No.
Okay. He says something to Paulie that's almost seeming like Paulie's in the know about what's happening to Alan. But then Paulie just shrugs it off or something. Burt Young, okay. But Paulie just like shrugs it off. I'm still calling him Paulie. And so I thought, so maybe he's in the know about this whole time thing. But they never really elaborated on that. So maybe. It could also be that he's friends with her and they cast him because
I doubt it. You don't cast such a noticeable character without having it be a bigger role than...
I'm hoping you're right. I love him.
Yeah.
I'm hoping you're right.
So yeah, I want to get back to some of the things that you said, is that with regards to empathy, so for Nadia, it's more nuanced in that her, succeeding in the game, so to speak, was to have more compassion and empathy, but also, but to me and I guess for Groundhog Day, it was similar, but more overt, I think, in Russian Doll, which is that it's not about just having empathy. It's about stop focusing on yourself so much. That's the issue. So it's not just give. It's actually a paradigm shift in your soul of, I'm going to stop wallowing and looking at my own experience and my story and my reality. And I'm actually going to look outside, like opening the curtains and looking out into the world and going like, okay, I'm going to start noticing things a little bit more.
I have to agree that it was there. For example, in the first N scenes at her party, she barely acknowledges most of the partygoers, easily leaves her party. And of course, she's dealing with something pretty traumatic, so fine. But in that near the end, when they appear again, because they had all started disappearing, she's so grateful to see them, and she hugs them, and she thanks them for being there and stuff like that. So there was definitely that. That said, and maybe this is just my flaw of being trained in this more overt Hollywood style, but it's very obvious why Bill Murray is flawed.
Right.
And so we really see his growth and his journey. She seems likable to me from the start, and the choices he made. So she went home with a dude to screw him. So what? She doesn't know the backstory that he's an asshole. So what? So she didn't help some drunk asshole that's maybe dangerous in the store because other dudes were being assholes to her too. So what? So I kind of was like, all right. But as far as her mom's story, I didn't get to see enough how that was affecting her life negatively. And I wish I would have, because that's what I wanted to see.
I think that's implied, which we'll get to after the Blake. What do you?
Let's do it.
Blake?
After the Blake. Let's do a Blake.
All right, we're back from the Blake. And whenever we come out of the Blake, we say become a patron by going to patreon.com. That's how we know you love us. If you become a patron, you get access to our best episodes, the premium episodes. We send you instructions on how to do that. Plus, if we get enough patrons soon, we'll be able to offer our second scholarship, which will be $2,500, $2,500 to a needy student in mental health. Also, like our Facebook page, also like or follow us on Twitter, follow us on Instagram. My wife is getting much more involved in posting things there, and they're fun to be a part of. So the way I think it's implied is that she is affected by the loss and so the story of Nadia as a child was she had a mom that was troubled mentally and was not such a great mom all the time.
Which makes sense because she was essentially raped as a teenager by a kid in New York City.
Right. Oh, you're talking about
kids.
Yeah. Berto's referring to a different movie in which Chloe Sevigny was in a movie, maybe her first.
Yeah.
In a movie called Kids, which was a groundbreaking movie for its time.
Did you say groundbreaking?
Yeah.
What's wrong today?
I'm just making up new words. I'm
groundbreaking.
I'm dancing.
It's a groundbreaking movie.
I'm dancing in my pants. I'm celebrating in my pants. You know, it's one of those things. Having grown up with my parents, I have both my parents were raised in the United States.
Yeah.
And their grandparents were raised in the United States. But for whatever reason, both sides of my family are not the most eloquent speakers and will screw up a lot of syllables and not know how to say certain phrases very quickly. And so maybe that part of my genetics is kicking in. I don't know. But so she has this troubled childhood. And when her mother, before her mother dies, she has this thought, like she kind of wishes her mother would be dead or something or she rejected her mother and went to live with her grandma. And she felt guilty, but she was also like, I'm done with my mom. And then her mom dies and she feels terrible about herself. So it's implied that she took a turn in her life of essentially nihilism, of avoidant, of relationships, of not caring about herself, smoking all the time, not being very healthy, by avoiding that her boyfriend's kid, not being nice to people, but not telling other people she's going to be nice to them. Just like, look, don't depend on me.
Yeah.
I'm a free spirit. I'm cynical. This adoption of this paradigm, and that's how she is now. And that is one of the main things that this mechanism of repeating her day or her life is trying to teach her to deal with the grief, to deal with the loss, deal with the guilt, you know, and have some self-compassion and maybe cry about it and grieve that whole process, and then come out on the other side as someone who isn't avoiding life, but is more genuine to her own authenticity.
I hear that. I wish that first sequence before she died the first time had better demonstrated those negative qualities.
So, and I think that's the appeal of Russian Doll, is that it's not so overt, right? And I think that was a good choice. You didn't like it, but I think it's a better choice, because if it was more overt, then it would just be kind of like a sassy Groundhog Day remake.
Okay, but maybe you don't have to go that extreme, but here's the deal. Like, from my perspective, she lives in an environment that's like that anyways, which is one of the things that turned me off the show initially. Is I actually don't, I spent 2 years in New York and I love a lot of things about it. I didn't love the attitude. That New York attitude, I hate it. It's so touchy and rude. And second, I didn't like that scene of her party with everyone being hyper hipster and everything they say is a quip and everyone is super witty, and it's like, ugh. Okay, so that turned me off a bit. But in all honesty, when I looked at her character, I was like, oh, she's a successful game developer. She is self-sufficient, lives on her own. She clearly has a lot of people that care about her because they threw this party and they're all there for her. She goes home with some dude that she met, and she's a free-spirited woman. She's not ashamed of her sexuality. This is all great stuff. Very self-confident. What's the problem?
So that is a great point that I hope people didn't walk away from the show thinking, because I don't think that's what they were trying to say. I think they were at first kind of playing into some stereotypes of shows, thinking that you would grab onto those, but then they later would subvert that. I don't know, the stuck-up professor guy who she had sex with on the first go-around.
Yeah.
So you look at him, and he, just the way he looks like a douchebag. He talks like a douchebag.
Yeah.
But as we learn his character through the series, I learned that the guy, he's just a regular guy, and he actually has some self-esteem issues.
Yeah.
And he's not a terrible douchebag. He's not tricking anyone into having sex with them.
Yep.
He's not preying on anybody. He even says to Alan, look, your girlfriend was having sex with me, but that's not because I took her away from you. It's because she gave up on you a long time ago. Yeah. And that's not my fault, dude. Right. You know? Yeah, I'm having sex with a lot of people, but you know, I'm not being bad to people. That's just my lifestyle. So I thought that was really good, because in my view, and maybe other people had a different take, was that guy wasn't evil. He just was living a particular kind of lifestyle.
But precisely why I thought that it was odd that one of her growth moments was not going home and sleeping with the guy.
But not to say that I'm going to reject having frivolous sex. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to look to Alan and help him, because that's a more meaningful thing for me to do.
No, I understand that timeline, but at the end, the other timeline where the Alan in that timeline is trying to convince her to do things differently, it's like, why not be like, yeah, look, first, I'll wait for you. Go have sex with a dude. That's fine, because I've grown. I don't really care. But when you come back, I need you to talk to you, because you're going to get run over by a car. You know?
Interesting. Yeah, that would have been better. That would have been
well,
better.
I don't know. It'd be hard to pull off, because to some extent, this is where it did get to the stereotypes a little bit. I think it felt a little natural to be like, yeah, don't be such a slut. Right. But wait a minute.
Yeah, when I think about that, that's a good point. I think that, I don't know what the writers were trying to say exactly, but I suspect that if they heard you saying that, they would actually sort of blanch at the idea that
they were trying to slut shame or something.
Yeah, because they could have easily made a cartoonish version of that guy that we all could easily hate, but they definitely didn't do that.
So I agree with you. I didn't want something completely overt or anything. So I'm talking about, like, you could have thrown maybe a couple little extra things. For example, when she walks out of the party, this is the first timeline, and she sees the homeless person, she actually wasn't like rude or uncaring. In fact, she said, I think I know that person.
So that's another clue of another couple seasons that will involve
prequels.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, but again, that wasn't a sign of her being a bad person. I was like, oh, okay, that's interesting. And also, it's pretty quick into her timelines that she starts looking around to help people. Now you could say, well, maybe it's because she's like self-interested to get out of the loop.
No,
but I don't think that's true.
I don't think it's true either. And I think, again, you were trying to shove, I think, because of your love of Groundhog Day, this into an 80s, early 90s style of writing, which is so much more overt.
No,
she starts the story not being an asshole. She's a complicated character who has a complicated history that leads to her actually not being terribly unhappy, but not really being her authentic self.
But here's the rub. That's all great and good. I love that New York romantic comedy you're about to film. But why did you throw up time travel in the middle then? Why does she get to get involved in this crazy anomaly of the universe?
Well, that's a really interesting question that I don't know if they'll ever answer. I hope they never do. But in Groundhog Day, it's very clear.
Because he's an asshole.
Well, by implication, God did that to him.
Sure.
Well, a benevolent force wanted him to learn a lesson because he has power in the world.
Oh, God. I never thought of it that way. Now I don't like the movie.
It's totally that way, right? It had to have been some...
I took it more of like the universe, but sure.
Well, a benevolent force or being created a scenario to teach this man a lesson. Whereas in Russian Doll, I think it's much less clear what, if there is an outside being, exactly what the purpose of this is. So it's because of the nuances that you're bothered by. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And if they did make it more in the direction that you are thinking, it would have been more clear, oh, this is a proxy for God, essentially, coming in and trying to teach her a lesson.
I guess where I thought they were going to go in those last few episodes, and I thought, oh, this could be really good, was that the reason they both got embroiled in this thing and entangled, essentially, is because their choices ended up impacting each other in a sort of a mirror way. And I thought that would have been so poetic with the whole theme of the mirrors and everything else. But it wasn't quite like that.
Right. And again, because I think it was clear to me that, well, I shouldn't say it's clear to me, but I suspect that the writers had written drafts that were more clear and more overt. And over time, like the way you smudge a painting or a sketch to make it more abstract, they took a smudge to the script to make it less clear exactly what they're saying, because they didn't want people to walk away going, this clearly symbolizes this clearly symbolizes that, and much more impressionistic. As it was wrapping up, I was like, because I was thinking, where are they going to overtly tell me what this whole thing is and what the point is? Because it could have gone a lot of different ways. Like literally a God figure could have come down from on high, played by Alanis Morissette, and said, blah, 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 this is what we're trying to teach you. It could have been that over, or it could have been in the direction that they went, which is like, well, I get the sense that a lesson that she learned was to be more empathetic, less self-centered, less self-destructive, more optimistic about humans and the world, more as more of a collaborator with people who deserve to be collaborated with, more kind of free from her rut that she was in. But I'm not quite sure if that's what the point was.
Well, and the point, and my problem is that all works great for comedies or dramas set in our familiar reality. As soon as you introduce the supernatural, with that comes the rules that you set forth for your supernaturality. And if you present ambiguous or hard to follow or contradictory rules, like Lost in several seasons in, then I start going, well, then anything is possible. And I'm not saying this show fully went that way, but towards the end I thought, it's kind of unclear why this all triggered. Because her story and his story, it seems like the only point of connection is the dude she was going to go home and sleep with. And other than that, the fact that he was in the same store, but that seems really tenuous.
Yeah.
So I was like, and now I'm not saying this would have been good, But for a second, I thought that it's that he gets so drunk, he gets in a car and hits her and kills her. I thought that was the connection. Now, that would have been maybe too cheap or whatever. But in my simple, like, well, let me know why this got connected together. That would have, I'm not proud of saying this, but I would have been happy about that. But if you're not going to go that simple, fine. Wow me. And I felt like, okay, and maybe to your point, maybe this is because they need to go further with 2 more seasons. And so they didn't, if they tied it so neatly together, then we really would be like, what else is there to say?
Yeah.
Maybe that's true.
I get it. And I could see that. I have heard a similar argument about other things that I've seen and not really agreed with. Having said that, there are surreal theater that I have seen in person and on the screen that really bothers me. So I get that feeling, but I just don't feel like this is in that category.
No, I want to tone down. I'm only railing against it as to why I gave it a 7, not an 8 or a 9, right?
Well, the reason why I would give it a 7 too. The reason why I didn't give it an 8 or a 9, well, so let's just get into some of the bad things, is there were some moments where Nadia's, the actress, Natasha Lyonne, I actually thought was kind of annoying. There were some lines that she would give. I couldn't tell if it was the writing or the way she was directed or the choices she made as an actress. But there were some moments when I thought, okay, you're clearly trying to act like Columbo or it didn't seem earned that she was this, real rough voiced girl from the streets who, has a lot of mannerisms that look kind of old school Columbo-ish, And
in some ways, like she was, because there were even statements she made that you would imagine the actress to make those statements should be like 30 years older than she is.
Right.
Yeah.
And it felt out of place because there were other times when she acted rough and real, but it didn't seem like a put on. There were times when it felt like she was playing it up, and it did, and I thought, it kind of rubs me wrong a little. I also thought that I agree with you. That's not how I'd say it, but I agree with you that some of the story plot turns were a little disjointed to the point where at some like, because I knew it was 8 episodes because you could see on Netflix, like, okay, you're on episode 7 out of 8. And like toward the middle of episode 7, I was like, okay, well, eventually this is gonna get wrapped up. And they started going down certain roads, and then it wouldn't really be a road. And I'd be like, we've been down a lot of roads.
Pick one.
that haven't meant anything. And I'm getting a little dead end fatigue. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like it just seemed like it was maybe 2 episodes too long. So
to that feeling, so you know what my theory when I was, I think, in episode 3 or 4, before they introduced Alan. So it must have been episode 3, I think.
Okay.
I thought, because the show is called Russian Doll, I thought the whole thing, unlike Groundhog Day, was gonna be more nested, such that, because I was thinking, how is she going to be able to solve all these people's problems? Because in Groundhog Day, that ultimately wasn't what it was about. It wasn't about him solving everyone's problems in that linear fashion. But in this one, it seemed like they were going that way. Okay, the homeless guy is going to die. Okay, this person, the gas is going to blow up and stuff. But I was thinking, there's no way in one day you could probably piece together to solve that. So in my mind, what they were going to do is that the different timelines were going to have to sort of small resolve. And each time she closed off a loop, she would bubble back up to a different timeline, and in that one, that loop was closed, and so it wasn't a problem. But the next one would. See, and I thought, that'd be kind of neat.
So so I don't agree. Now, would I have liked that movie that you're writing if they did it
like
well?
Inception,
right? So Inception is scientifically discrete. The lines are explained to you. And there's some mystery, but not a lot. It's a mathematical equation that tells, if you will, that there's a logic to it all. But in this, they clearly from the start said, we want to smudge all that out.
But that's okay. Like Amelie has no science, yet she has to tie all these little loose ends with one person to solve the other person. You could have done that in a nested time fashion.
So all the criticisms you have, which, you know, is your criticisms, and is that you wanted it to be more like Inception or Groundhog Day. And
well, its own thing too, but like, anyways, but my point is, I thought that because the title was Russian Doll, I thought that's what they were going to do.
Right. And what I think that they did, which I think was a consistent tone, which is this is an abstract, impressionistic story. And the Russian doll metaphor is just like that. It's not an overt reference.
Clearly not overt.
To something. Yeah. So I want to talk, you referenced it earlier, we talked about it a little bit, but I want to just highlight that the moment that I loved in this show was when Alan is wrapping up his story with his girlfriend. And up until this moment, he's really nervous and hurt about the whole thing. And he's doing this live, die, repeat where he just subjects himself to her every time. And she's, you know, he's like, yeah, okay, get to the point. You want to break up with me. You don't want to be with me. And then Nadia enters his life, and she's more of a free spirit. And so she starts blasting her. And then he walks away, Alan, he's like, oh, you really gave it to her. That was awesome. And it was this sort of step. And we're led to believe, like, well, maybe that's his path, is he has to break free of this woman and tell her off, or like individuate, essentially. Yeah. Which I didn't really take note of at the time, but I'm so glad they didn't end there. And then all of a sudden, I think because Alan's character wasn't primary, they were able to be more concise with this story. Yeah. And then all of a sudden, and again, it seemed totally earned, but very surprising to me when it happened, but made so much sense, was he's sitting down with his girlfriend and he's like, I get it. You know, we were distant and you cheated on me, and I get that. And I'm not mad. It hurts. It's terrible, but I get it. And I'm just sorry. I just want you to know that. And I wish things would have turned out differently. And, you know, and it's just this beautiful moment. It was real and a scene that I don't think ever have seen in a movie or any depiction, because we live in a society where there's good guys and bad guys. And she's a slut who cheated on him, and she deserves to get what's coming to her. And this was like the complete opposite of that. Yeah. And when he did that, my brain saw something about that whole scenario for the first time, even though it was all there before. Right. You know, that perspective was all there before, but I didn't have it until Alan voiced it. And then I was like, oh God, yeah, of course. Right. And it was just such a great moment in that.
Totally agree. That's why I was saying earlier, to me, Alan's story is so much cleaner here, both because the thing that we are meant to believe sort of triggered him down this wormhole is that he committed suicide, and that basically why he committed suicide. And, you know,
we don't say committed, we say completed.
Oh, completed. Sorry. And of course, you know, it's like we said, it's smudged. The science of it is smudged. So they're not making a claim that everyone who completes suicide goes down these wormholes. They're just saying this was what triggered. So for me, that's clean. And two, his journey, his progression, it was obvious that at the beginning when we encounter him, it's obvious that he is in pain and why. And maybe this is me being simplistic, but I didn't have to guess, well, what's his deal? Oh, I see what his deal is. And then his journey of growth to where you're saying, I love that misdirection where we're thinking, oh, right, he's going to get to a self-mastery where he doesn't need her and he can like tell her off. But no, his journey ends with, oh, I was wrong. I'm so sorry this happened, blah, blah. Yeah. And I love that scene. And so for me, that was nice. Yeah. Hollywood style. Love it. But to your point, that not Hollywood style in that it's a usual story we see. Just like it had a beginning, middle, end for me. Right. I loved it.
Yeah. Harry Nilsson, the song that always was playing most of the time.
Gotta get up. Yeah. Gotta get down.
Had you heard that song before?
Yeah, but not that much. not that many times.
It's a perfect song. Really great song. Do you know what the song's about?
Not really.
It's about wanting to give up partying and wanting to stop using drugs.
Oh, okay.
Got to get up and And Harry Nilsson had problems with drugs.
I see.
And he died early at 52 of a heart attack related to drug use.
Oh, jeez.
And he was friends with John Lennon, and they drank a lot together when John went to L.A. on his last couple years. Him and John Lennon drank a lot together.
Oh, boy.
They were famously ejected from the Troubadour in L.A.
Oh, that's who he was with.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And they lived together for a bit.
Because when we did our episode, you were talking about that.
Right.
I didn't know it was that person.
And Harry Nilsson wrote all the songs for Popeye in 1980.
Oh, no way.
With Robin Williams, which I saw when I was 10 years old with my family for Christmas Eve. We always see a movie in the movie theater. And I remember watching Popeye, and my whole family loved it because it was just, you know, I need to rewatch that movie, but I imagine it's not as great as I once thought it was. So some other things here in my notes is, let's see, we've already gone over that. Oh, what other movies can you think of that have a afterlife theme or live, die, repeat theme that we've seen recently?
There's that Tom Cruise
Edge of
Tomorrow, which had a different name initially, right? And then they changed the name.
Well, I don't know.
It was like Live, Die, Repeat, I think it was.
I think that was the English title. In England, I think they titled it differently, and they titled it Live, Die, Repeat.
Yeah, I remember at the time they had been advertising it as Live, Die, Repeat, and then changed it, or the other way. It was advertised as Edge of Tomorrow, and then changed it to Live, Die, Repeat. One of the two.
I think it's the second one.
Yeah,
because people were like, you know that movie with Tom Cruise, just like you did, you know, because Edge of Tomorrow is such a bad name. Bandersnatch,
right.
Also, The Good Place. It's not a repetition.
Sure.
But
they reset the clock. Yeah.
And it's afterlife-y stuff.
Right.
Forever, which has forget the actors from SNL. It's an Amazon show. Oh. It's about an afterlife. Anyway, there's just one of my favorites of this thing is the game Majora's Mask. It's one of the Zelda games. Oh.
And it is very much Groundhog Day, Amelie, that kind of thing, where essentially I need to rewatch Amelie. It's been so long. No, the Amelie, to be fair, is not a relive your day thing, but the aspect that I'm referring to is how in Amelie, she has to help one person to help the other person to help the other person to help the other person.
All right.
And so in this game, Majora's Mask, you live the same 3 days over and over and over. And you have to learn the perfect sequence of things to do in those 3 days to win the game.
Oh.
It's awesome. So it's like this great game version of it.
Some other things I noticed: Nadia's Aunt Ruth, played by Elizabeth Ashley.
You mean Princess Leia?
Princess Leia?
She just reminded me of the late.
Her deep, raspy voice. The camera pans to reveal several pictures of her and her deceased husbands.
Yeah.
And I saw a picture of what looked to be her as a younger woman with George Papard, who was in Breakfast at Tiffany's and A-Team.
Yeah.
And
I love it when a plan comes together.
And I was like, wait, that does not look like a photoshopped. So many movie, when they needed a younger version of them, they always Photoshop, and it always looks terrible. But this one, I was like, that photo.
They must have been together.
And so I Googled right away, and lo and behold, they were married.
Oh, wow.
In the past, and I felt proud of myself that you
picked that out
in a very quick pan. The last thing I'll say about the movie that is worth commenting on in my book is, why would you have it Yep instead of Yelp?
Oh, right. They couldn't get the license, I guess.
But do you need a license to have? I mean, if Google, if you say, I'm going to Google something, or I'm going to get into my Ford Taurus and drive away, do you need a license to say such a thing?
Depending on how you're using it, perhaps.
I just don't understand this. For whatever the reason is, whether it's not the movie maker's fault, whether it is the movie maker's fault, I just have to say it's driving me crazy.
Because it takes you out of this.
It completely takes me the fuck out of it. Like, if people are walking around going like, well, the most popular search engine, Doodle, it just oh, that's right.
All right, we're in a movie.
I'm in a fantasy where they don't get the rights for things.
Yeah.
Unfortunately,
it's so litigious, right? So I mean,
so whatever the cause is, whether it's
it drives you nuts, and I agree. Do you remember Grand Theft Auto like had fake names for the cars because they couldn't get the license at first?
I don't remember that. But
yeah, like Grand Theft Auto 3 and probably I think 5 has real cars.
I mean, that bothers me less because it's a fucking video game.
Well, but so to your point, for my point is I actually like one of the things I love about video games is feeling immersed in the world. Okay. And when it's a world that's supposed to be like the real world, like Grand Theft Auto, as soon as the car is like a fake name, I'm like, oh yeah, it's a game. But you're right about a movie where it's like, especially this one, you could say, well, it's already not grounded in reality. But there's movies that are
grounded
fully,
in
well, but they're time traveling and stuff, you know.
But they're not in a different universe where
sure.
You know,
fair.
It just drives me crazy. Like when I see that a beer is often not real. It's a totally different brand. I'm like, that's not a real beer.
But someone could say, well, in that reality, in that timeline, it isn't Yelp, it's Yep.
It just takes me out of it.
Yeah. I mean, you know what took me out of it, which is funny. I didn't understand why she died so easily. I get that it was funny, but I didn't understand why she would die so easily.
Yeah, when she was falling down the stairs, she would...
What was the explanation? There was no... And I get it. They blurred the line. They smudged the numbers.
Well, I think they were making it a comedy. And they wanted the deaths to not be like super realistic.
And you could say like, well, you notice this theme where fruit was getting old and where people were disappearing. So maybe in these weird broken timelines, she's just susceptible to death. That's the way it works,
I guess.
Yeah.
Actually, that fruit thing kind of bugged me because you start noticing that the fruit starts to get older and older, and then at some point, someone opens up a fruit.
She cuts into it,
and it's fresh.
Yeah.
It's only getting rotten on the outside.
Right.
Like that to me is along the lines of
that was a little weird.
That doesn't make any logical sense.
They tried to explain it like because she was saying like, well, see, time is 4-dimensional, so in 3 dimensions this looks rotten, but when you cut into it, I'm like, okay.
Yeah.
All right.
It's like, no, you're still in the 3-dimensional world. Okay. Like if you're talking about 4 dimensions, then we're talking about a different dimension. We're not talking about what was inside a...
Right. What was inconsistent for that is that the prop that she was used to make her correct point about time being an additional dimension, but why did the prop magically work for her? Right. So then you could say, well, maybe she's in control of this reality, but...
Well, because to me, I thought it was an interesting metaphor that as... she started to screw up and get more frustrated and more self-centered in a lot of ways.
Yep.
That her world started to decay.
Right.
And it gave a sense of an impending doom. Like you're not like Groundhog Day.
You can't keep doing this forever.
Eventually something is going to change because people are disappearing.
You'll be in the Matrix room with nothing in it.
Right. That was the implication. And so when you have fruit that's dying, it sort of adds to that danger and that sense that like things are decaying.
But then when you cut into it and it's fine, you're like, oh.
Or wait, so it's fine? So the
people are not disappearing?
The fruit's fine? Like it just looks like it. I didn't like that at all, really. Maybe they'll explain that in future.
Do you get what I mean when I say that I was bugged by the whole uber hip, everyone talks in one-liners and quips?
Yeah.
But that didn't bother you?
No, it didn't bother me. I was mostly on board with that.
Okay.
Yeah, it didn't bother me. I mean, it did bother me in the way that Nadia's character was maybe 10-20% of the time was written in such a way that it seemed like, okay, let's make a tough girl.
Sure.
You know, so in that way it bothered me, but I thought the hipsters were actually really funny. Like when Lizzie, or I can't remember her name, the white-haired girl, wakes up and the guy has the dildo coming out of his butt, and like I just thought it was just so, in the way that they dealt with it, like it wasn't slut-shamey. It was just like, yeah, people have orgies.
I guess this is probably me projecting, because you know what I felt that girl, Lizzie.
Yeah.
I felt like, she would probably react nicely to me. Whereas I felt that her Asian friend, the one that greets her every time saying, baby, it's your party. I was like, I bet you she wouldn't react nicely to me.
What do you mean, to you?
To me personally.
Based on your experience?
Yeah.
So if you went to this party...
If I went to this party, I'm like, Lizzie, I'd get along with. I wouldn't get along with the hostess.
That's funny.
I would get along with Nadia.
Why do you think you thought that? Because to me,
because
just
I've had
I would have thought either one of them I would have gotten along with.
Yeah, I think for you that might be true. I've just had experiences in my past with people with that kind of personality.
What do you mean that personality? Asian? You talking about Asian?
No.
I know, I'm joking.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. No, I didn't catch that you were joking. I thought you were serious. I'm like, no, not at all. I mean the very superficial, talking 1,000 miles a minute, but about nothing, and everything is about them, and did no one's eating my chicken, and blah blah blah. And I just like whenever I've encountered people like that, it's like oil and vinegar.
Oh,
like we're like, oh,
weird.
And so I don't know. So I got a bad feeling about her for that reason. And
what about the dildo butt guy? What'd you feel?
I love that. I love that. I miss those things.
Well, that does it for that episode of Psychology in Seattle. What did you think of Russian Doll, and how are you looking forward to the season 2 and 3? I know you have an opinion. Comment below or email us at contact@psychologyinseattle.com, and please take care of yourself because
you deserve it.